right. Welcome, everybody. It is awesome to see all of you here. My name is Madison Clark. I'm part of the SourceGraph team. I've been with SourceGraph about 2.5 years, and boy, it has been incredible to see the company grow and change, and really seize the moment we're in now with AI, really put our decade of experience in code search to work building Cody. So today is all about AI, as our Code AI Summit name suggests. And I think we've got some incredible content planned that's going to get at really the heart of what many of you are curious to hear about. Just a quick show of hands, though. Who in the audience today used AI in any capacity? OK, that's pretty much everyone. What about using AI to write code? Anyone today use AI to write code? OK, I'd say about half of you. Of those people who just had their hands up, was the answer you got from Code AI useful or even right? Let's see, show of hands. OK, I'd say it's about the same number. And just today, if you wrote code using AI, did you get an answer that was just plain wrong, not useful, couldn't help you at all? Show of hands. OK, I'm only seeing 2 people. That's pretty incredible. So clearly, it's working. I think we're going to dig into a number of ways that we can make it even better, even more useful. And I'm going to welcome our first speaker up. Beyang Liu is our co-founder and CTO at SourceGraph, and he's going to be talking all about the lessons we've learned building AI for code. So, Beyang.
Awesome. Thank you, Madison. How's everyone doing today? Beautiful weather you have here in New York. It's glorious. Every time I head somewhere else outside of San Francisco, I get to experience what real summer is like. It's pretty nice. So yeah, I'm going to do a very brief talk about lessons that we learned building with AI and building for developers using AI for code. Because I want to segue real quick into a fantastic panel with 3 other people who are going to talk about the lessons they learned. So very briefly, my name is Beyang, co-founder and CTO of a company called SourceGraph. And for those of you who don't know who we are, SourceGraph is a developer tools company. We've been around for over 10 years now, and our mission is to enable everyone in the world to build software, starting with professional developers. And so what we started building 10 years ago when we started the company was the world's best code understanding engine, because we thought that the biggest problem facing developers was the ability to understand and make sense of the code inside their existing organizations. So we built really awesome code search and a really nice interface for exploring and understanding code. We scaled that to many great companies, some super massive code bases out there in the world. Anyone who's worked inside one of these companies knows what a really massive code base is like, and all the complexities that you have to deal with when working in large code bases. Now, what does that have to do with AI? Well, how many of you have noticed this weird phenomenon that sometimes happens when you're using AI for code, where it's not always truthful? Anyone notice this happen? So hallucinations are kind of like a classic problem. So here's me asking ChatGPT to show me how to use the SourceGraph API to fetch references, and I get a very confident response. And this looks great. It seems like well-formed GraphQL. Our API is in GraphQL, so seems right. And this is approximately what our API does. We have an API for fetching references. There's nodes. There's paths. But there's just one problem. And that is that this specific node in the graph, really an argument to that node, doesn't exist. So if I were just to blindly copy and paste this in, it would actually be wrong. And it might actually waste my time because I have to go back and understand what it actually did and fix the thing. Now, we noticed there was one weird trick to make this output much more accurate. And that weird trick is all you got to do. All you got to do is you got to comb through your code base and find the magic usage example of what you're trying to do. And you paste that into the window. And then all of a sudden, it emits output that looks like this, which looks basically the same, but it's actually hitting an argument that actually exists. So that was interesting. We're like, one of the challenges with working with AI is this kind of like hallucination effect. So if we could just make it attend to those magic pieces of context in your code base better, it would do a much better job of emitting working output. And well, now the problem is like, how do you find that magic code snippet? And then we're like, that problem seems familiar. It seems like the problem that we kind of started the company to solve. And so that's what we've been doing essentially for the past 18 to 24 months or so. And so I just want to show kind of like a real world example of why this context piece matters to working with AI. So I'm going to show two editor coding assistants. On the left hand, you have Cody. On the right hand, you have one of our competitors. And we're going to ask it a simple question. In this case, I just want to know where the chat UI is defined within our own code base. And so if I ask an editor assistant that only uses, one LLM underneath the hood with kind of like basic context fetching capabilities, this simple question, you're going to see it try to fetch some context. But the way they go about it is not very good. It's because they don't have good kind of like primitive context fetching mechanisms. Cody, on the left-hand side, we asked the same question later, but it actually finished first and generated a much higher quality answer that's much more accurate, and also gives me nice follow-on links that I, as a human, if I want to dig deeper, can kind of go further into. And so I just want to show that off as kind of like a concrete example to anchor that point about context mattering a lot when it comes to being productive with AI in your code base. Another important element is choice of model. So it's one thing to be able to fetch the best code snippets from your code base and paste those in the context window. But then you have to ask yourself, okay, how good is this model at actually integrating the context I provide? And so one of the things that we kind of banked Cody on back when we started building this, about 2 years ago, was we knew that there was going to be a ton of innovation, a ton of evolution at the model layer. If I were given this talk a year ago, there was basically one game in town that everyone knew about. Now, standing here 12 months later, it's a completely different world. There's a huge ecosystem. There's multiple large foundation model providers that have built high-quality frontier models. And there's a huge, vibrant ecosystem of open source models as well. We actually use one of the open source models, StarCoder, as our main code completion model in Cody. We actually found that it's better than all the proprietary models because it's faster, and that's really important for that use case, and it's good enough at integrating the context. We also think choice is an important aspect of this because we're starting to see alpha in terms of fine-tuning our own models for specific things. So, we were kind of cautious about fine-tuning from the get-go because I think one of the challenges you run into with fine-tuning is that it's expensive, the iteration cycles are longer, and oftentimes, fetching the right context basically serves the same purpose. But we're starting to see opportunities where fine-tuned models on specific languages like Rust yield much better results. So what we've noticed specifically with Rust is if you take an off-the-shelf code generation model and ask it to write Rust, oftentimes you'll get stuff that looks like Rust, but it's actually more like Pythonic or more JavaScripty, but it's just adapted to Rust syntax. And actual Rust developers are like, no, this looks like a junior developer who knew JavaScript and now is trying to write Rust for the same time. If you fine-tune a base model, in our case we use Mixtral, hope I'm pronouncing that right, you actually get much more idiomatic code in that language. And so choice is another element of doing well. We also have a new protocol for context fetching that we released a couple weeks back. I think Quinn, you'll probably touch upon this a little bit later in the talk, so I won't go too much into it there. But basically the idea here is that as we started thinking about more and more ways to incorporate context, started talking to our users about the context that they wanted to attend to when they were using Cody in their editor. More and more of them said, hey, there's a valuable technical context outside of my code base. In fact, there's a long tail of stuff that I might reference as a human developer. Maybe it's in my production logs. Maybe it's in the chat. Someone asked a technical question. Maybe it's in my issue tracker. And so we wanted to release an open protocol that allowed all these different context and data sources to bring context to AI, but over an open protocol that doesn't lock you into any sort of one vertically integrated ecosystem. Okay, so what's the high-level picture? We think of context and choice as being essential to pushing this kind of like Pareto curve or frontier of what AI is capable of doing. So if you visualize what the coding AI applications are today, I think you can think of this as, I hope this is not overly reductive, but you can think of it as like a 2x2 curve. On the x-axis, you have degree of automation. where on the far end, it's like full automation. That's like full self-driving. You type in the issue description, and it just magically works. The y-axis is how reliable and how general is your thing. So I think where we are today is kind of like the red line. Like there are simple applications that are like inline code completion or chat that are somewhat reliable and somewhat general. You can use them for a lot of languages. You can use them in a wide variety of code bases. And then as you get further along the automation curve toward more agentic use cases, you see a steep drop off in terms of how general the solution is. The agents that have been released right now, they take a long time. Sometimes they get stuck. And they're more in this kind of, we were talking about this earlier, they're more in kind of this neat demo or like science fair type zone right now, and not yet ready for kind of day-to-day production use. And we think that the combination of high-quality context fetching and model choice is essentially going to push this frontier outward as, of course, innovation continues to drive fundamental capabilities at the model level. And so what does that look like to push the curve? So I wanted to give a quick preview of something that we've been working on in our sort of labs division. And so the question we asked ourselves is, can we use some of the primitives that we built for these kind of like single hop queries and stitch them together to do higher level planning with AI? So here's a feature that, the working title is called AutoCody. And so I'm going to ask AutoCody to implement a complete feature. In this case, add a new @mention provider to Cody Chat. And so this is like a multi-step process where it's trying to emulate the things that we've observed our own users doing and that lead to decent quality results. And so it's going to restate the problem. There's a bunch of research that shows if you restate the problem into something that's more detailed and lengthy, that somehow leads to better results. Some research suggests that the more tokens that the model has to work with, the better it is at computing the right answer. Then we have a context fetching layer, which uses a lot of the context things that you saw earlier to surface like those magic snippets. Like these are the snippets that you would probably want to surface yourself if you were implementing this issue. And then as the last step, it generates a pretty decent high-level plan of like, here are the big steps. So if you're like me, oftentimes when you bite off a big, hairy issue, you kind of get lost along the way. You go on like a subquest and then you kind of lose track of where you were. And so our thinking was like, maybe we can use the LLM to kind of keep you as a human on the rails, so to speak, guide you through the process, continue to allow the human to do the hard parts where AI is not quite there. And then for the easy parts, the quote unquote easy parts, but which are more kind of like tedious or toilsome, like updating the changelog, for instance. That's something that I constantly forget to do, but everyone knows that they should. We can have the AI jump in for those steps and automate those. So that's kind of a quick preview of how we're thinking about end-to-end automation and trying to push up that Pareto curve, what AI is capable of doing. But enough about me. We have a fantastic panel of folks from 3 other developer tools companies that I'd like to welcome to the stage now. So John Coughlin from GitLab, he's the Director of Developer Relations there. Aaron Staples from LaunchDarkly, Developer Experience Engineer. And Ash Ryan Arwin from Nihilus, Director of Developer Relations. So welcome to the stage. And I guess to kick things off, do you want to quickly, let's go down. Oh, do you need a mic? Oh, we have another.
You can share.
We got another one. Yeah, there you go.
I'm dangerous. They knew I was dangerous with a mic.
So you guys want to give a quick intro of what you do and what your company does, and then how you're building with AI?
Cool.
Yeah, John, let's start
I'll
with
go
you.
first. So I'm John. I'm the Director of Developer Advocacy at GitLab. GitLab is a DevSecOps platform, so you can do all of the different stages of DevOps within GitLab, and we also have an AI tool called GitLab Duo, which kind of in the same spirit covers the entire SDLC.
Awesome. My name is Erin McHale Staples. I am a developer experience engineer at LaunchDarkly. LaunchDarkly is a feature management platform which allows you to control a feature before release all the way into production, and even when that life cycle starts to change, if you want to experiment and kind of iterate on that release. We use AI. One, we are really big test crash test dummies of it every day, but we also work with a lot of other companies that are using AI. So starting to think about what does feature management look like in the age of AI, and how do we kind of prevent those fun things happening.
Hi, I'm Ash. I'm Director of Developer Relations at Nihilus. Nihilus is a single abstraction layer at the API level for all of the email and calendar providers out there. So instead of building email and calendar integrations provider by provider, you can just use us instead. And we take out all the frustration of keeping up to date with all of those different APIs. We're using AI at the team level internally, also starting to bake it into some of our developer tools, and of course at the API feature level as well.
Cool. So I wanted to kick things off by asking kind of like a pointed/fun question, which is, so the past 18 months, there's been kind of this AI revolution, and I think most people would agree that like there's definitely value and substance here. Like this is an amazing new technology. It does things that before would have been like warp drive level or just like undoable. At the same time, there's also been a ton of hype, a ton of like flashy demos, a ton of fear, uncertainty, doubt, a bit of doomerism as well. And so, for you guys working with AI, how do you distinguish between what is hype and what is actually kind of like day-to-day helpful and practical? Do you have like a system, or are there specific examples that come to mind when you think about differentiating between the two?
I'll kick us off. First off, everything is helpful for me in a weird way. I do an AI comedy troupe on the side. So everything that's not helpful in my day gets thrown in a comedy because... So it's actually just like too helpful. Depending on if you kind of just move the poles or whatever to seek, move the flag poles. But yeah, that all being said is I do look a lot about it. A lot of these models, it's all data at the end of the day. That was my AI spicy take. And kind of diving into what is actually powering the model and like, is it achieving the goal that you set out to achieve or helping you along towards that goal? And when I'm like looking at new tools or new companies or like people building with it, it's like, how well do they understand how a model is built and like what is kind of under the hood is kind of a way I think about it. And that's kind of a good BS detector.
Makes sense. So like interrogating people about their actual understanding of how the AI works.
Yeah, like if you're sending me just like a, wow, this is so cool with a lot of emojis and like probably like a really cool YouTube schnazzy video, I'm a little more skeptical. But if you send me a GitHub repo or like a database, I'm going to be way more stoked. So getting kind of that practical element.
Interesting.
Yeah, I think for us at the very beginning, it was easy to have a lot of very quick ideas about like what kind of API features we could come up with using AI. And as a developer relations team, it actually felt like we could have those ideas and we'll pass them on to the product team. But really what I wanted to encourage with our team was just play around, right? Like we won't waste time by trying new stuff because at bare minimum for us, we can help developers identify what might be a dead end for them. But when we do find cool stuff, we can bake it into our developer education efforts. We can bake it into our dev tools, and then maybe eventually some of that will come down into product. But I think for us, just kind of getting in there and trying things out early has been really important.
Makes sense.
Yeah, I think as far as like the kind of skepticism that maybe exists in the market, like I think there's probably some fairness to that. Even like consumer apps, when you open up Instagram and try to search, now you get prompted like if you want to ask Meta AI something. It's like no one asked for that. But I think like from a productivity perspective and from a developer's perspective, like there's already results like out there and people are benefiting from these tools. Like when we were kind of getting that show of hands earlier, I think like half the people in this room raised their hands that they were using those tools, today. Mm-hmm. So, I think that's a good sign that people are already seeing value. And I think as, the companies that are building these tools continue to kind of mature and get better feedback from their customers, you're just going to see that kind of cycle accelerate. So I'm really kind of bullish on where this is all going. And I think, you might have used like an 18-month kind of time frame. I think like in another 18 months, we're going to be in a place that, probably a lot of us aren't even expecting right now.
Yeah. Do you think in another 18 months, we'll still be talking about AI as kind of like a core selling point or feature? Or do you think we'll kind of go back to the classical thing of pitching your product in terms of like the things it actually does or the value it actually delivers to users?
Yeah, I think more of the latter. I think like AI will be a layer that kind of serves to help people solve problems. And so, that it'll just be assumed that that's part of the stack of whatever kind of software you're interacting with.
I would say that like at a pretty visible level, one of the conversations we're having right now is just about like, should you put AI in your docs, for example? And the answer is probably yes, but at the same time, like I think the user experience side of it is what I worry about in terms of how much of the burden of deciding which little widget on this website shall I use to find information is very important. Like I don't want developers to really have to think about that so much. So ultimately we kind of started talking about it more as like, how do we surface knowledge and answers, so to speak? No one comes to us to say, I want to chat with a bot in your docs versus search. How do we kind of aggregate that all into one thing where they don't need to think about it? And if I zoom out, I kind of feel like that's where we'll end up being in another 18 months or so is like, yeah, we don't need to talk about it. We're here to solve a problem for you. This is what we do.
Well, and I think to kind of reiterate off of that, like the biggest thing is on solving a problem. Like I will fully admit I went down a rabbit hole that I should not have, that wasted a ton of time because of an AI thing, because I was trying so hard to make it work with this model. And if I just switched the models, I would have been fine. But I was stubborn and ChatGPT said I could do it, so I was fine. But that all being said, I don't think we're ever kind of going to see that if we aren't getting our hands dirty. I actually think it's kind of irresponsible for people who are building and working in AI to not see what's out there and test everything, kind of go out and crash test dummy and see if you can actually solve some problems.
Yeah. I feel like there's this dimension too of like building a product that is expectation setting. And this gets back to your like docs point. I think, AI for docs is amazing, like asking a question and getting a generated code sample that is like 80% or 90% of the way there is a huge shortcut. At the same time, like we've seen with some users of Cody, where if we set the expectations too high, like, oh, this is some sort of like AGI, superhuman intellect, you can almost be disappointed even though it works so well. Yeah.
Well, I thought I'll tell you that just as someone who's pretty bullish on all of this stuff, I have seen when we've run tests before where we had to, we'll go a little technical here, but like we had someone come in and say like, hey, how do I get started with Nihilus using Node? And it interpreted Node as being Node-RED and not Node.js. So Node-RED is sort of like Node.js is like back-end JavaScript. For many of the folks in the room probably know that, but Node-RED is like this sort of drag and drop interface for like building code. And it just kind of killed me just a little bit, where I wanted to jump into those logs and be like, no, that's not what we meant, kind of thing. So setting the bar too high in terms of like what you should be able to expect from it can definitely lead people down the wrong path from step one.
Yeah. Makes sense.
And I think another thing that I think people, in this room might already be aware of is that like the AI learning curve is maybe a little bit different than kind of other software tools. Like, talking with people about like prompts and how much context, and even in your talk, you were showing like when you provide more tokens, more parameters, and you get a better output, like there's just like that's something that you actually learn, but as you start using these tools and you figure out like, what is that thing that I need to add to my prompt to get that code, from being 75% of the way there to 90% of the way there. And, maybe someday it'll be, 100% of the way there, like reliably. So I think that's another thing, like where there's this kind of, like something, it's not really well documented yet because all these tools are so new. So you kind of learn, like there's a lot of learning by doing with the AI stuff, and that's part of the managing expectations.
But I think like we can learn a lot from GitHub Actions. Like I think it was when that came out, I remember they never worked. At least for me, I was like, I could never get them to work. And it took me, there was all those quirks and nuances that you had to pick up. And now it's like, oh, we'll just make a GitHub action for that. And it's pretty a commonplace routine now. And that was very much not the case when that was, and I mean, how many things do we automate in our code now? And without AI, that's pretty cool.
Where do you think we'll see like the new applications or use cases of AI emerge in the next 18 months? Like so far, we've seen a lot of tools that target what I call like the inner loop of software development, when you're kind of like in the editor and writing code. Do you think that we'll continue to see innovations there, or do you think there'll be like other parts of the SDLC that see more attention?
Yeah, I think, probably a little bit biased here, but I think you kind of nailed it, when you showed your demo, and it's certainly something we think about at GitLab is, developers are only spending 25% of their time or so writing code and 75% of their time doing things like editing a changelog. And so when you can bring efficiency to those other things, that will help you, shorten cycle times, free up people to work on the problems they actually want to be solving. And so I think that that's going to be an area where you see a lot of growth.
Mm-hmm.
One use case that I've really been using it for, which is probably not what you're supposed to use a code AI tool like Cody for, but I use it for anyway, is a lot of my role I'm making tutorials or explaining how things are done or kind of like giving feedback to other parts of the team. I use it to comment out my code. So like something will already be made and written, and I'm like, go jump some comments in there and like give it so someone who's never seen this project before can read this and understand what every single line does, which I think is a huge thing for learning and development, which kind of increases the accessibility to it all.
Yeah, and that goes right into things like building out things like testing or documentation or open API specs, where sometimes it's pretty tough to get disparate engineering teams to all agree upon like how will we write open API and that kind of thing. So having a tool that can help with that is huge.
Or I think databases. We were geeking out before this on, I have not written a database, like set up database query in so long. I just asked ChatGPT to do it. I'm like, please just make a database. Thanks, with these specs. Bye.
Nice. Yeah. It's like anytime you know that there's been thousands of people before who have like encountered this issue and you don't want to deal with it, that's kind of like the ideal use case right now.
But yeah, even going back to what I was saying earlier around like learning by doing, like I'm sure that your prompt for like setting up that database, like as you've kind of, gotten results that you weren't happy with, you figured out ways to kind of improve that. And so, that process of iteration is an important part of the learning curve.
I've also watched the ChatGPT evolve. Like I'm like, oh wow, it actually knew what I wanted this time. Okay, thanks.
Yeah. But in some ways it devolves, right?
It devolves. It totally devolves too. And you're like, wait, no, that's not what I wanted. But I do think that there is the part about commenting your code and like understanding that side of it is like there is some knowledge and fundamentals that you have to have in order to get the most out of it. Otherwise, you're just copying, pasting, and not knowing why it's devolving or what's the problem.
Cool.
I will say just on the broader SDLC conversation too, one of the things I've been playing with a bit more is, let's see, we probably all go through some form of like an OKR cycle in our companies, and setting OKRs is like a forever thing. Sometimes you can get a month into the quarter before you're finalized, and I'm finding I'm getting a lot of mileage out of taking in other people's OKRs or thoughts and just kind of figuring out how to kind of set ours as well. Because I think there's something in there where companies can tend to commit like 250% of their bandwidth because every org is setting their own OKRs that require other teams' input. So I've been trying to play around with that a bit, and I think like that's an area that like maybe engineers won't see day to day, but at the management level will really help us out a lot.
I mean, personally, I have Cody write my OKRs now, but just kidding.
I mean,
Quinn's giving me the look.
It did. ChatGPT got me $900 off my rent in New York City. So
wow.
It knows how to speak landlord.
Actually, that's a good segue because the next question I was going to ask about was how do you measure the ROI of AI? Because that's a hot topic these days.
Well, my rent. Just
But yeah, does anyone have a good way to do this? I think like all of us are at the point where it's like, yeah, it's magical, it's clearly useful, but then a CFO walks in the room, and they're like, can you put a price tag on that? And then you get it. So like I have this thing where it's like quantifying the ROI of AI and developer productivity is kind of reduces to quantifying developer productivity, which is kind of like a perennial problem. So what sort of frameworks have you applied in practice to address this?
Yeah, so for us, we're looking at the kind of standard like developer productivity DORA type metrics that people have been using, and you can extrapolate it like based on the adoption of an AI tool within an organization. Are you seeing things like change failure rate and cycle time kind of reduce? So that's where we're at right now.
Cool.
I think another one is we think a lot about it in terms of we've had early conversations of it allows you to have a little more empathy because we know that our users are likely using these tools. So it's like, how can we continue to help them? So we did release a Copilot extension recently, and it's kind of thinking about how many people are actually using it, and are they using it more than once? Like, what does that adoption rate look like? Are we able to ship more resources that have an understanding of what our users are going through every day, knowing that they're crawling through probably these tools to make things work?
Mm-hmm. And I will say one of the challenging factors about measuring it is that, as we all know, we can use a model to spit out all kinds of stuff all day long. We did an exercise about that with content about a year ago, and that's a thing I'm glad we tried, but I'm also glad we had the wherewithal to walk away from it too. But imagine like in an engineering team environment, like the more code you can write, that's not necessarily what you're trying to optimize for. Right. So in some ways, like one of the things I'm interested in looking into is the depth of which we can get to with fewer people, not so much the sheer amount of output. Like if we can come with a V0 that is much further along and much more well considered than what we might have had in the first place, and it facilitates better interactions and collaborations, I think that's super important. So it's not just about the sheer amount of characters on the screen that we're putting out, but more about the depth.
Cool. I have a bunch more questions I want to ask, but one thing we want to get out of this event is also give the people the opportunity to participate. So does anyone have any questions they want to ask? I see a couple of hands. There's one in the back.
Yeah, do you want to?
Oh.
Yeah, we'll take one. Do you want to run it? Okay, go for it.
Who do we have?
Gentleman in the back, I think, had his hand raised. And the rest of you, think of something.
I think I'm definitely representing the lake community. That is, I'm not a programmer, but I've been using it. And when you ask that question about whether or not this is going to be here in like 12 months or 16 months, I mean, let's go back to Lawnmower Man and how long it took for virtual reality to actually be something applicable. And that kind of threw me the wrong way that Facebook and Instagram and WhatsApp have it on there. That means it's being given out to people, and it means that it's legitimately out there. In the last 2 or 3 weeks or months since they did that, it's everywhere.
Yeah.
So, obviously they had to take Vladimir Putin's face off of it and Leonardo DiCaprio and all that stuff. But, other than that, I've been using like 15 hours a day. And now I'm on like the front page of a magazine. So, it's pretty amazing. And 16 months from now, this stuff is going to be used to generate organs and extend people's lives. And it's going to happen very, very fast. So I think there's no way in the world that this is disappearing. Okay.
Yeah, there's something interesting. First, I didn't think we would get a Lawnmower Man reference so early on in the chat, but that's awesome. I think there's something interesting in here where, like, you mentioned like organ generation as one thing, and I'm not at all qualified to talk on that. But I think that like the UX of autocompletes and chatbots is just like us barely starting to grapple with like what this technology actually is. I'm much more compelled by, I had this notion of like, it should be more ephemeral than that, right? And I think some of the stuff that Apple announced last week around application intents being addressable at the system level by AI, there's something super interesting in there where I'm not just having a conversation with a fake human. It's just that my system is starting to understand me and what I'm trying to do better. So, people just kind of throwing bots into things and seeing what happens. There's probably a double-edged sword there for sure. But I think we'll start seeing more nuance in terms of like both the user interaction and also like what it is we're expecting out of them, be it an organ or just like Siri doing my laundry for me.
Yeah. Kind of to expand on that, because you got me thinking, and I think a lot about this. Prior to LaunchDarkly, I was in the data labeling space and data integrity space. And I do believe, we have to really ask ourselves the question, is AI the best tool to answer? Like, it is a tool in our toolbox. Is it the best tool for the job? Like, sometimes at the end of the day, going to we're going to play medical today. I am also not someone you should ask for organ advice. But if I were to do something, and when I was in the data labeling space, we actually did have a lot of folks who were using it for medical research to help speed up the amount of time to do like vision recognition on like, there was a doctor who was using it for ophthalmology, or even detecting differences in gait using computer vision, like people walking gait, which I think is so fascinating. But without the external knowledge or the context of a medical professional, that information is kind of, it's a so what. So we need to really define like what is the time that we need to pull off the computer and unplug ourselves and like really answer the so what intentionally.
Yeah, I think just to go back to Ash's point a little bit, like I think the kind of evolution of this, or maybe the next evolution of this, is like being AI driven is kind of what we're calling it. You know, you mentioned AI guided, where it's like instead of having to be proactive and go prompt the model or push the button or whatever, you know, I think the AI will be able to kind of be intuitive enough to say, you know, this is probably what you want to do next based on what you normally do when you're doing these things. And that could be at an organizational level, an individual level. But I think that's, you know, where I'm hoping to see us go next. And I think that'll be a real value add for people, because they'll be kind of, instead of having to, you know, go out and hunt the thing that they want to do, that, you know, it's going to be presented to them.
Cool. Other questions? I have a question. What do you think is kind of like next for the field, or what are you most excited about in the next 12 to 18 months?
I'm super stoked about local models. I think that's like really interesting, because I think that's also an on-ramp for people who are AI curious yet skeptical about its sort of implications on their privacy or their customers' privacy. So having local models, either that be on device, I've heard of some like running them in browser, or like just, you know, local to your cloud instance. There's something super compelling there. So that's something that we like to play around with a lot, using the Olama CLI. This thing is really, really cool. You just download it, have it pull a model, come back after dinner, and it's downloaded, and then you just like talk to the thing, and it comes with a REST API attached to it, so you can like talk to it from your applications locally. But there's something there, so I'm really interested to see what we start playing around with there to get more people into the let's try AI, because we can assume that when we're using the local one, it's not calling out to the cloud.
Yeah, and then you'll be able to code an airplane too.
Yeah, super great.
You make a reminder to close my Docker containers on my desktop, because my computer usually makes a lot of noises. Anywho, I'm really excited about the context problem. I think that's something that AI was never really great at. It's like seeing the demo today is really exciting. A lot of the tools, and we can really see how we're getting more widespread with that. So how do we use context and context mindfully? Like that's, because I think sometimes you can, as much as you can put good context in there, you can also put in garbage, like garbage in, garbage out. So how do we work around that problem is something I'm very curious about.
Cool.
Yeah, I kind of answered this already with my last comment, but I think that shift towards like AI-driven solutions, you know, and as agents become more mature and can interact with each other and, you know, tackle more complex problems, I think that's going to be a really exciting kind of shift in the space.
Yeah, it's exciting times ahead. Thank you all for being a part of the panel. I think we'll all be around afterwards if people want to come up to us and ask questions. So,
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Thank you.
All right. Awesome. Great panel. Apparently, Erin is going to be the person to talk to about reducing your rent through AI. So happy hour. Find them. Okay, next up, we have got Gunjan Patel, who is the Director of Engineering at Palo Alto Networks, talking all about the future of AI and software engineering. And spoiler alert, I've seen there's some hot takes and predictions in the talk. So take it away, Gunjan.
Thank you. It's nice to see everyone here. My name is Gunjan Patel. I'm a Director of Engineering at Palo Alto Networks. And I've been working on AI initiatives for the company. Before I begin my talk, I would like to dedicate this talk to my friend Nikhil. He's a close friend of mine. He passed away last week. I almost canceled this talk, but I decided that he was excited about me giving this talk here. So, and he taught me a lot about software engineering and guided my career. He died at a very young age, unexpected death, but he had a huge impact on my career, so I would like to dedicate this talk to him. All right, so we're going to talk about 4 high-level areas. One is key changes with AI, systems of the future of the people, developers, and then some predictions, 5 years out maybe. So there's some hot takes in here. So what are the key changes? One of the fundamental things that's changed, as a developer starts working on something new, I am a developer myself. I think that seems pretty straightforward. I'm going to be able to do that in 2 hours. So in my mind, it's a straight path. This is in 2 dimension. But as I start coding, gaps appear, right? I start implementing something, and it's like, oh, shoot, I need to add Google Auth provider to this. I haven't worked on it, but OK, I need to figure it out. So how do we do that? 28 minutes and 2 cups of coffee later, like, OK, I looked at Stack Overflow. I Googled a whole bunch of things and figured it out. So you fill in the gap. Then you move on. You implement a bunch more cool stuff. And then the time comes deploying it on Kubernetes. Now, that's a huge gap. That might take 2 days, 2 weeks, or most people might give up. What happens with AI and AI-based tools is it bridges those gaps, right? So when it comes to Google Auth provider, you can just ask, generate a code for me. You don't need to go deep and understand how it works or how do I make it work with this version of the library. So what used to happen previously in prototype phase was some people would give up early on, and 20% of the people would give up on Google Auth like very early on. Majority of the people might give up at like very challenging thing, or they go bother their coworkers. With AI, the implications are more people will get to the finish line. They'll get there faster. One unexpected consequence might be that it's filling in the gap. It's bridging the gap, not filling the gap. So you don't fully understand. If you solve the problem yourself, you would understand how Google Auth works or how Kubernetes works. But here you're shortcutting that process. So there's pros and cons, more pros and cons, but keep that con in mind. And a lot less distractions. You're not going to Stack Overflow to search for something or Googling something where you get distracted by an ad or a notification. So you'll get to the finish line faster. Let's talk about systems of the future now. Now, what might the systems look like in the future? So one such thing would be IDE-based AI assistants, right? Cody is an example of that. Human primarily drives intent and co-writes the code with help of AI. Similar to pair programming, if you have tried it. Fills in the gap in the knowledge. Whenever you get stuck, it's kind of like icebreaker of the ship. It's going and breaking the ice so you can sail smoothly behind it. And you get in the flow and just write code. It also handles a lot of low-hanging fruits. It's very useful for junior developer or new hires, or if you're new to a certain module that you're working on. This makes for a great developer experience, and you can immediately see 20 to 30% velocity improvement. We have deployed Cody at my company, and even initially we are seeing 20 to 30% velocity improvement. Next sort of thing that Beyang talked about was AI agent-based systems. Now, there can be a whole bunch of agent-based systems where human provides a high-level intent. It's AI's job to break it down into smaller tasks and have agents do some of them. And then at the end, typically a human reviews it. Some examples could be local supervised agents with human in the loop. So very similar to the demo Beyang showed. Then CI-based agents that will do peripheral stuff that is boring to you as a developer, like improving variable names, code comments, etc. And then there's full self-driving agents that work in a dark basement, like Devin and Devika and OpenDevin, etc. Recently, I bought a new car. I won't name which one, but it has a full self-driving mode. And I thought I would get to the office fine. I won't have to worry about it. I let it drive. Almost killed me on my way back home. Skeptical of the third one, but let's see. We'll see. These are good for low complexity, high labor, or boring tasks. But they could have good outcomes if they are implemented properly. But I still think they're farther along. Some examples are TestGen LLM from Meta. They released a paper on this that takes a brownfield unit tests that are already generated, improve them, add more unit tests to it. Without going into much more detail, there is a paper reference and an open source implementation cover agent there. Another one, this is something that I prototype internally at my company, which is CI-based agent. So developers writes code using Cody or any IDE-based AI assistant, check in that code in the CI, it automatically improves on the code, right? So start by improving variable names, improves the variable names to make them more, useful. What it also does is it also helps with AI answers in the future. If the variable names are properly defined, the answers are also better. And add code comments automatically. Now that makes the code, without changing the code logic, it improves the code. That helps adding and running unit tests in a loop. So this is where you can just plug in the TestGen LLM module that was referenced in the previous slide. Then based on the environmental context where this app is going to be deployed, who are the users? Is this external app, internal app? What network is this deployed in? Based on that, we have a bunch of models argue with each other, simulate 3 employees, 3 AI employees, 1 red team engineer, 1 Python developer, and 1 engineering manager. Engineering manager is sometimes useful. But I needed 3 to break the tie, so I put an engineering manager there. So they debate on pieces of code, prioritize each security best practice that's not followed, and come up with a prioritized list of what needs to be fixed. Now, either human can come in and fix it, or AI can take a stab and propose a fix, and then human can approve or reject. So that's the improvement that happens afterwards. One is Copilot, one is autopilot. This is sort of like offline pilot. Now, future of the people or roles. How do the roles evolve in the future? So I feel like there's a lot of developers right now, maybe, and you're familiar with the bell curve of how useful smart people are. Same thing in developer community. If you are here somewhere, should be fine. I will find out based on my job status in the next few years where I fall. But will AI replace your job? Right now, I feel like in usefulness, it's like somewhere here. But if all the work you do is repetitive or low complexity, then maybe, yeah, you need to find something that's more complicated or requires a human touch. But it's also like machine code. When previously machines only understood binary code, then machine code came along, people used to write in machine code, then C, and then Python, and now we are moving towards English. 2 years ago, nobody said that, like, oh, I'm debugging my Python and I'm going into machine code. Maybe some people did, but most people didn't. So English becomes a programming language, sort of. And anyway, coding should be just a percentage of your job, 30 to 50%, right? Like, your job as a developer should be solving problems or building great products, not just coding. This will also make the field wide, and a lot of people who are what I call non-machine whisperers. I call developers machine whisperers, right? Like, we know how to speak this special language that has semicolons, and to talk to machines. A lot of people who are really smart, they don't know how to speak it. But now people from the adjacent fields, like product managers, sales engineers, designers, they'll be able to code, and it will become much more inclusive. Does it keep getting smarter? Okay, so I'm out of my depths here, but here's the hypothesis. We are here today. More data, you need more data to make the LLM smarter, right? So far, we have seen good curve like that. Now, what happens? There's hypothesis that even if you keep feeding it more data, it's not going to get smarter. We might hit a plateau, this red line here. Or it might keep going up. The green one is unlikely. So smartness might plateau, but usefulness probably won't plateau. Why? Because there's still so much more to be done that doesn't rely solely on smartness of an LLM. And I promise I didn't coordinate this with SourceGraph folks when I talked about this, that there will be adding more context will push this line up, right? The LLMs might have a gap, but then adding more local context from documentation, Jira, Slack, it will make it more smart and useful. Okay, hot take. This dude is wearing a tinfoil hat, by the way, if you can't tell. So these are predictions, unlikely to happen. Maybe they're not super likely to happen, just as I've written here. And no, your eyes are fine. I just use different text here because it's far in the future, not as likely to happen. So 6 to 12 months, we'll spend a lot less time on low complexity tasks like unit tests, UIs, writing script, less time writing documentation, easy language modernization. If you're going from old language to a new one, it'll be a lot easier. A lot less context switching. 1 to 2 years down the line, quicker iterations, faster POCs, significant code authorship from AI. Code reviews might become optional or might become very fast. Unit tests might be auto-generated. QA will be integrated and early on in the cycle. Similarly, security will also be early on in the cycle. AI will also prevent or fix 80% of the quote-unquote stupid bugs. A lot of bugs are not very sophisticated race condition that you need to think about, right? A lot of them are very simple bugs, and I believe they make a majority of the bugs. 5 years down the line, it might be intent-driven code. So you just write code comments, and AI different models can debate with each other and fill in the blanks, understand your intent. Full SDLC integration, where a developer just writes a skeleton, rough outline of what they want, and AI can fill in, and then developer can come and like polish it, move around things. Code documentation may not exist. It might be generated real time based on who is asking, because when you write documentation, it can get outdated. With AI, you can generate real time when you need any help. Areas to see significant disruption will be UI, front-end development, QA, documentation. Less affected areas will likely be DevOps, SRE, or integrations work where you still need to plumb things together. 5 years down prediction, some very high-level predictions. 95% of the code written out there will be AI. AI engineer becomes a standard tech job. A lot of open source competition for big tech software. There'll be personalized user experience for every person. So Cody UI might be different for you than for me 5 years down the line. I don't know. We'll see. CI/CD will automatically optimize, identify and optimize bottlenecks in your application. And a new AI-centric programming language might be born. Python, Go, Java, they're all in English still. It's made for humans to talk to machines. If machine is programming machine, then you don't need those languages. I would like to end with a quote from one of my favorite authors, Yuval Noah Harari, paraphrasing him, but he said, build tents, not homes with deep foundations. So to be prepared for the future, you need to be ready to pack up and move on and do something different entirely. So that's my advice for developers in the future. That's it. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Gunjan. I think we're going to have to check in like 6 months, years, see how we're. I saw people taking pictures of the predictions, so we'll see how accurate. Maybe next event is like tinfoil hat swag. I see there's a couple people standing in the back. If you have an empty seat next to you, would you mind just raising your hand quickly? So if anyone does want to move up, please feel free. We've got space. Okay, cool. So next up, we've got a panel conversation led by SourceGraph's own VP of Technical Success, Amy Meny. And we're going to be talking all about adopting AI, some of the challenges, themes, tips, tricks. So Amy, come on up, and I'll let you introduce the panelists.
Actually, if you want to just join me. Awesome. Wonderful. All right. I'm going to actually let you, the three of you, introduce yourself because I'm curious to hear from you as you go through your intro, kind of who you are, what you do, and what your experience with AI in the engineering world has been. You want to start with you, Dan?
Totally. I'm Dan Collins. I'm chief architect at a capital management, Peak 6 Capital Management. We do U.S. equity options trading, and we've been playing around with AI since, I don't know, it came out. Lots of initial starts and stops, but really now looking at how our engineers can use it, how our business and PMs can use it, just to accelerate workflows and kind of see what we can do with it.
Cool. I'm Yasmin, founder and CEO of Wild Moose. We're basically building an AI agent that helps developers solve production issues faster. We're responding to alerts by engaging with logs and metrics and all kinds of different monitoring data sources to basically kick off any investigation and get you kind of going with a production bug faster. And yeah, we're kind of like on the other side of AI adoption, kind of seeing the challenges, from as a company, working with companies, trying to kind of, help them see the benefits and work through that.
Awesome.
Oh, yeah.
My name is Tom Tolley. Thanks for coming today. My background is as a developer, but back many years ago in the 1980s. In the 90s, I started some different companies. In terms of AI-assisted programming, I wrote a book that just came out from O'Reilly called AI-assisted programming. And it was an interesting experience because as I wrote it, the industry kept on changing. So after I wrote a chapter, I'd have to rewrite the chapter, and then I had to rewrite it again, and I didn't think this would ever end. So I'd eventually had to just stop writing the book, and so it's out now. And I also developed some courses for O'Reilly about AI-assisted programming, and I get little analytics on, who's viewing these, and, unit tests. We're talking about boring stuff. My boring stuff is really popular. This technology really does take care of these tedious things, and things I didn't think that'd be interesting to people really are interesting. So it's a little bit about my background.
Awesome. Yeah, we have a very diverse group of individuals and perspectives, which is very, very cool. To start us off, I would be curious, all three of you in very interesting, unique positions. How are you seeing AI most benefit engineering teams today? Can start wherever.
I can go first, I guess. So I've seen my teams use it and integrate it with the short circuiting, kind of like the diagram that was up here earlier, Gunjan, where you're saying it kind of breaches the gap instead of having to fill it. I would say that we've always been smart and adaptive and looking for ways to accelerate kind of like our development process. And this is another tool in the toolbox that we can use to short circuit things. And then also you can only know so much. And so sometimes it's nice to be able to ask a question before you actually go bug someone else. And the AI can be helpful for that stuff too.
Yeah, definitely great on the educational part of that. And I think kind of to the point that was made before, right now it seems that generation of code is definitely like the strongest application, and there's like a very sticky experience that is happening there. But in reality, it's just like a small part of what being a programmer is. So kind of like our challenge is how we can kind of take it to the other parts, and the industry is kind of trying to take it there, but there's still a lot of challenges. So that's what we're seeing.
My perspective is a little different. I'm not at an enterprise software company, but I do talk to these types of companies. I think, I know everyone loves to do regex. There's these things that, these very technical things that are just so boring that I think, a lot of these, there's a lot of low-hanging fruit that is being done. But I also think, there's a lot of exciting things happening with the multimodal capabilities of these LLMs, where you can take a screenshot of a UI and turn that into code or into Next.js. So I think that's another exciting area because, a lot of developers may be really good on the back end, but they're not good on the front end. So it can make up for those things and make you look like a spectacular, full, well-rounded developer when you really aren't, because it can understand these visuals. So I think that's going to really accelerate and get really interesting. So I think it's more, we talk a lot about characters, but I think the multimodal capabilities are also very exciting.
Nice, interesting. Yasmin, you mentioned challenges. I would love to hear more, on the flip side of that, some of the challenges that you've encountered and how you've overcome them.
Oh, that's a good question. So yeah, I guess there's multiple things that we're seeing. One, there's like some misconceptions, I guess, around like what kind of data should companies have when they're starting to are they prepared to work with AI? We're hearing from companies often that they say their data is too messy, or that they didn't keep it in a very organized way. But in reality, the biggest power of generative AI is its ability to work with unstructured data. And I think that's something that we kind of are working to get companies to see and be open to explore, even when their data is organized in all kinds of ways.
Interesting. Tom, you mentioned a challenging area that you saw in your research when we were speaking before around security, cybersecurity.
Yeah.
Can you go into that?
Yeah. So there's a lot of papers that have come out about cybersecurity risks, about code generation, because it just takes a lot of these repos, and sometimes people don't write the most secure code, even though it works. There might be some vulnerabilities in that code. So you really do have to do some code scanning and review it. But the nice thing is that if it only took you 10 seconds to create the code, you have more time to devote those activities, to review it, to do those security scans. There was another paper where we talked about hallucinations. And one case, the LLM created a framework, and that didn't exist. And so you could, if you're a hacker, you could go and create that framework, and it could be malware. So someone doesn't know that. They just copy and paste that code, use it, and then it introduces some malware into your system. So And then there can be ways you could jailbreak it and prompt inject it and do these crazy things. And there's also model poisoning that is occurring, especially we're talking about these local models, these small language models. If they get infected, what is that going to mean to your code as well? So security is, yet again, Palo Alto Networks, you probably should buy their stock because this industry just keeps going up and up and up because it's just, this AI just introduces even more opportunities for hackers.
Dan, what about you?
As far as challenges, we have no challenges. I'm just kidding. I think for us, it's mostly like policy and how and what's appropriate for AI usage. A lot of our code, as you can imagine, as a trading firm, we are protective of it, and we want to make sure that it's kind of like used in the proper way and not disclosed, et cetera. So we have a fairly open-minded team thinking about how do we apply AI, how do we put a good policy in place, and when is it appropriate to use. I think there's a lot to what engineers do beyond just coding. I also think there's a lot of boilerplate, front-end engineering type of stuff, or even just like rubber duck debugging, where you need to just ask a question about something very basic. And those are all great places to like start applying it, but like we don't have the intuition, and that's the like challenging part now. There's no book we could go pick up off the shelf, at least until now. So yeah.
Yeah, that's your next book.
That's right.
Kind of sticking with you, I'm curious, same lens, companies are obviously investing so much in AI. You're seeing, kind of discrete budget items, but there's still this wider range of emotions in terms of adopting it, detractors, people really on the bleeding edge of it. I can imagine that perhaps you see a wide range of that in kind of the tech and the work that you do. What are some strategies that have helped kind of get people more comfortable with actually integrated into their workflows?
I would say for us, or at least what I've seen most, is just like having people start using it and getting accustomed to knowing like it's not magic, and it's also like understanding a little bit behind like what the predictive generation is doing and how it could be applicable to what you do today. So I don't know. I like to put it in the kind of phrasing of like, when you first were using your word editor or Google Docs or whatever, and you were getting like autocomplete results, they weren't the greatest. It wasn't always like fantastic. And sometimes like approaching it that way, like seeing them get better and then help you kind of like become more productive or think about saying something a different way. Those are like smaller steps to get used to it, I think help. The other piece there is like pausing when you need to pause and kind of asking the questions that you would normally ask. I head up our compliance team all the time where I'm like, hey, we have this new use case. We want to see how this works and kind of come back full circle on like, oh, this seems like something we want to be able to do. What would we do to make this possible? Versus like, no, you can't do it, and stopping the train there. So yeah, I would say those are both parts of that.
Yasmin, what are you experiencing?
So I guess that's something that we find very interesting, like since starting, is need to kind of manage the fear aspect. We've been seeing it like managed very differently in different companies, but in some companies we even see there is like an AI strategy person that is not only in charge of on evaluating new tools, but also kind of making it clear that the application level now of solutions are meant to create stronger engineers and not replace the engineers. And sometimes we see that in different conversations, you even speak with like 3 people from an organization and you have that one guy that is really not liking you. So kind of managing that and being very clear with the messaging is something that we feel very strongly about.
Nice. Yeah. Very nice.
I think the other thing is education, I think is important. Learning about prompting a model. We were talking about agents just a while ago. Agents theoretically are great because you could just tell it something very simple and it does all these great things for you. And I think that's how some people approach these LLMs, as if they were agents when they're not agents. And when you do it from that perspective, the disappointment level can be so bad that you'll say, wow, this is worthless. Why do people think this is great? It doesn't help me. And then you lost it. You lost that person. It was going to take a lot of time to bring that person on board. And I also think there's inertia. It's always the case. I have a background in mainframe computing. Talk about inertia. So, you know, you have developers, really brilliant developers, but you can't tell them, you know, you should try something new. And, you know, kind of set in their ways. So I think there's that as well. And it takes time to break that. But if people around you are doing so many things faster than you and the same quality and better results, then, you know, that can be an urgency to get to create change.
Cool.
Can I jump back in really quick?
Please.
So anecdotally, I remember a long time ago, I'm not going to say how long ago, I was on a panel that brought in like search for the first time to a big corporate entity. And I just remember like, how do we know what people actually know if there's search here? Should we allow this? And it was a big conversation that happened. And like I think about how easy we use search today and how we think about it and put it in context. And I am seeing a lot of the same themes happening much faster with AI, but it's definitely a interesting anecdote along those same lines.
I would also say I feel like there is kind of like responsibility from our side as like the vendors that are now trying to create those experiences to make the adoption like easier. I can share from our experience that when we started off, we did like kind of like what everyone did, which was a conversational interface, and that basically like honestly sucked. And like developers tried to kind of use it to debugging, but for debugging, no one really like wants to debug in a back and forth interaction with a bot. And we had to be honest with ourselves and understand that this is not the right UX for this. This is not the right experience. It doesn't mean that LLMs are not extremely helpful in debugging. It just means that we need to create a different, you know, product experience that in our case was like, okay, let's shift it and be more like responding to alerts, and then they can get the enrichment of the information even before they start. It's a different way of thinking about things. We had to change a lot of things, and we're also still learning, obviously. But I think it's like our responsibility to make the product in a way that people will want to adopt it, you know?
Yeah. Must-have tool. Yeah. Cool. Want to give an opportunity to take some questions from the audience, but the theme of this is the AI hot takes. So would love to hear from the three of you what your hot takes are for, you know, either where you think AI is going or the innovation that you're most excited about.
So my hot take was things get better. I think that, you know, I love the analogy of like building a tent on a strong foundation versus a house and being ready to move. All of us who are in any tech, engineering, et cetera background, we know stuff changes very fast. So I'm just excited to see it become ubiquitous and what's next, you know. I think we're seeing glimpses of it, but it's gone so fast. Hopefully you don't have to write more drafts of your book, but like, you know, so that's where I'm at.
Hot take.
Yeah, or
I guess what we're mostly excited about is basically the level of autonomy, which was brought up a bunch of times today. And I think that's kind of like the biggest challenge right now of how you can create an agent that is actually, you know, kind of like even having an autonomy engine that manages different agents or having a way to score the result of an agent that went to, you know, try and create complete a complex task. So thinking of a more complicated architecture around like how to manage agents and really increase the level of autonomy is what's, I think, most interesting to see developing.
She stole my. So my next book is on agents. I'm writing it right now, so we should probably talk about that. But that is, to me, it seems like that's the next thing. Is, you know, this is kind of, you know, IntelliSense on steroids where we're at this point in time. But it's not really, you know, thinking on our behalf. And also I think this Apple intelligence is important because it's about the context. You know, they realize that, you know, you have all these applications, there's all this data on your system, it's all local, and we're hunting around, wasting a lot of time on this stuff. You can say the same thing about development. So if there's a way to use some agents to bridge that gap, I don't know if I think it's going to take a while. I've seen these agent systems and frameworks. They're just really at the early stages. But I do think there's a lot of potential there, and I do think that's the next level of advancement in this category.
Yeah. Awesome. Any questions from anybody in the audience? All right.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
we go.
So we have like 3 people with pretty diverse kind of jobs, and I'd be curious, like, what are the AI tools that you're using right now in your day-to-day, and how do you use them?
I can go.
Oh, yeah, if you want to go first.
Yeah, so again, I'm founder CEO, so I'm not a developer. So the things I use is Grain, that is recording every meeting that I have, and I think I'm in love with that tool. I don't know, I should be a testimonial on their website. I basically, which is kind of like, I really believe in that. It helps us also collect data in an unstructured way, and I believe we would be able to leverage that going forward with other AI tools. So kind of like, really happy about that. Basically transcribes every, kind of like the Zoom assistant that goes into all your Zoom chats. And we're using, and yeah, basically also, I use ChatGPT for every email I write, so.
For me, it's kind of similar, but like I feel like finding AI tools and incorporating them in the workflow is like what we do every day. So like not only SourceGraph Cody as far as like IDE integration or like development wise, but like we have an internal model that we run with a RAG-based process that we build our own documentation and kind of asks from Slack for things we're not comfortable kind of pushing out there and seeing what's there. I can't remember, Ash, maybe you mentioned Olama. Olama is really cool. You can run a lot of stuff there. But it's just like looking for productivity or enhancements where you can use tools and kind of see things that are out there. I would say we're trying it all.
What I do are experiment on things that really don't increase productivity. I just like to play around with things. So the agents are kind of, I think, one of those areas I've been spending a lot of time with. So there's frameworks like LangGraph, Crew AI, and there's these different systems where you can build these agents, and then there's these different types of agents. You can build like React and so forth. So, and to me, it's just a lot of fun. But for me, it's just like experimenting and playing with them, but I'm not sure if they really do anything to help me, but I do learn. So that's kind of what I've been playing around with. I do the ChatGPT, and I probably on every day I use that and these other tools, but I really love playing around with the agent types. And all this is open source and really interesting. Nice. Yeah.
Do we have time for one more?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, given that AI models can potentially like democratize who gets to write code in an organization, that could also be pretty scary, given that not everyone can read the code that they're generating. So any thoughts on like how to put guardrails on that, or if that's necessary at all?
Okay, I'll go. So we have a lot of people who write code who are of various experience levels. So we have some quants who write a ton of really esoteric math and crazy stuff. We also have like junior traders who are just starting off using our internal APIs. A lot of what we do is we look at like, okay, your job is to understand it, and then look at your role and what you should be doing and kind of like how much time can you devote to it. I also like to think about it as like, getting that first closed loop of like functionality. So like it's probably not the perfect thing, but having your seniors look over it and having your kind of like peers look around it, it helps you get to that feedback loop faster. So that's kind of what I'd seen. I don't know about guardrails and like monitoring and all that kind of stuff. We're still figuring it out.
Yeah, I feel like the checks and balances kind of need to be the same things as it was before, and it kind of lower the bar of entry. So again, in our space, we see it in the on-call of a lot of team members. You only want your senior engineers to sit in the on-call, and now you can kind of lower the bar of who is starting their training to go on-call. But still, you want the kind of like bar to what it means you are alone in an on-call to be the same bar, and you just have the tools that will help you get to that bar faster. If that makes sense.
Yeah, that bar doesn't change,
Exactly.
like is the thing.
Exactly.
Yeah, I agree with this. I think there's other systems like RPA, robotic process automation, all these different type of workflows and automation process systems that require coding, but maybe in the future they're not. That literally you can have someone who's a non-technical person create these systems because they're basically modeling things that they understand, and do they really need to know coding that goes behind that to create these automations. And so I think that's something that can be interesting, where you just kind of almost just cut out the coding part of that. And then that democratizes a lot of things where you're creating some of these applications, but you really don't need to have all the typical coding requirements you'd have.
Interesting perspective. Awesome. Well, I want to thank you both for asking questions, our wonderful panelists for your perspective and insight on coding adoption. And with that, hand it back to Madison.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, we have reached the final presentation here. Last but certainly not least, we have got SourceGraph's co-founder and CEO, Quinn, talking all about some of the hard problems we're solving at SourceGraph and where we think the future is heading. And my money is on the fact that we're going to hear the word context a lot. So let's see. Take it away, Quinn.
All right. Great to meet you all. I'm Quinn. I'm the co-founder and CEO here at SourceGraph. And I hope that the display works with no machine whispering needed, like Gunjan said. There we go. All right. So we've heard a lot from people that are using Code AI, that want to adopt it, some predictions for the future. I want to talk about where we see the next few years really hard problems in Code AI that are necessary to solve to make it a lot better, and frankly, so that every dev is using this. Not right now, 2 to 5% of devs are using it. So there's so much opportunity. And these two areas are universal context and autonomous coding. But I put more in there because it's so easy to get caught up in the hype. So it's more autonomous, not completely autonomous. That will come, but it's a spectrum. Let's dig into that first one, universal context. Yeah, we've said it a lot. I feel like it's, I don't know, probably 100 times by now. Context in this context is any information that's needed when y'all are building software. So what does this mean concretely? Well, you join a company, you get your employee badge and go through some meetings, and then you start reading the code and you get that context in your brain. And then you read through the docs to get the history, the architecture decisions, and then something breaks, and to fix it, you go read through the logs, you get context on what broke and why. You got more meetings, and all of this is how your human brain gets context. But it's not actually this clean, unfortunately. It actually looks something like this, and you're bouncing among all these different tools. It's a mess. You can't stay focused, and sometimes you forget, which tool is it? Is it the deprecated one, or is this a new one? How do I log in? I'm on this team or this code base. Which one do I use for that? And it's so much friction. In fact, this is one of the most annoying parts of being a developer. But this is context, and this is all the stuff that gets into your brain, and those senior engineers that can just look at a piece of code and instantly spot what the problem is. It's because their brain has all of this stuff. So this is what we mean by context. And if you think about what a human developer really is, it's a brain. It's a brain that takes in all that stuff as input and writes code on the other end, or reviews code, or ultimately builds software. And that's what a human developer is. I mean, we all just take in context. So I think you know where this is getting to, but this is what we humans all look like if we were to model all of you as mathematical functions, which is quite fitting. We're all devs here. We're doing a lot of stuff at SourceGraph to make that context problem easier for human developers. And now, I haven't even really talked about AI yet, but this problem exists for humans. So for the last 10 years with Code Search, we brought all the code in one place and made it so you can see history and definitions and references and all of that like in your IDE. We're starting as with OpenCTX, like Gunjan mentioned, to bring in information about what is the code supposed to look like. If your designer says, hey, you totally broke this form, well, for you to figure out, well, what's it supposed to look like, do you remember which tool to go to? Probably not. So now we show it in the code. If you want to use AI and Cody to help you get started on an issue, you can mention it in Cody now, even if it's from any of these tools. And the average enterprise has 70 different dev tools, so this is quite helpful. And we'll show this stuff in code review as well to see what is this doing in production. Is this change going to break something that a lot of users are hitting right now, and so on? And there's so many other examples like this. I think Launch Darkly is a great example. What if when you were looking at your code, you could see how many users are actually in this feature experiment group? You can do that right now, but there's too much friction, and we can really reduce that friction. So this is all for human developers. But it turns out that all this same context that humans need to know, AI needs to know as well. I mean, why would it not need to know that? And so that's where bringing this context in for humans is valuable. Bringing it in as context for today's AI and today's capabilities and Cody and other code AI assistants is valuable. Like Beyang showed, if you copy and paste in the right context, the AI can give you a better answer. But context is important for AI to be more agentic, to take more steps without the human in the loop. And I want to talk about why. It's the second thing that we think is really an exciting direction in code AI. All right, what is the hard part of coding? The hard part of coding is not writing the code. The hard part of coding is actually knowing, is this code correct? That's true of humans. I mean, we all know people that have taken a lot of Diet Coke and Mountain Dew and written a lot of code, and turns out it wasn't actually very good. We also know that you can have GPT-4o and Claude 3 writing code 24/7, and who knows if it's any good. The hard part is knowing if code is correct. And right now, AI is really bad at doing this. Now, it's good enough to make some really slick demos that work, that don't really work. I think someone said earlier they were early stage. So it's not that they don't work, they're early stage. If you think about why would AI be good at evaluating its own code and doing these more complex agent chains, there's really no reason why they would be good. Because if you want to model what an AI is, it's like a function of its training data. It's got a lot of random web pages, got that dude who answered that thing on Stack Overflow 10 years ago. Who knows if it's any good? It's kind of a miracle that they do so well, given this. I mean, it's a lot of training data, but it's still kind of a miracle, and that's why we're all here. That's this AI revolution of the last 2 years. But if you want AI to be able to know if this code works, you need to bring in all that same context that a human uses today. And that's the challenge, but you can do so much more. For example, if you can have the AI try 1,000 different possible changes or 1,000 possible ways of implementing the feature that you asked, have it go and test all of them. If it knows whether that code is correct, or even if this code right here that it tried is slightly more correct than this code, well, it can iterate in the background. It can deploy it. It can see, does it have an abnormally high error rate according to your log system? Does it, if you deploy it and run some shadow traffic against it or some simulations, does it increase revenue by some %? There are all of these things that AI can do behind the scenes without the human in the loop if it has the ability to know if that code is correct. And ultimately, that question, is that code correct? That comes from the outside world. That comes from context. So that's why we're really excited about context. It's not only critical for making humans have a much more enjoyable job while coding, it's also critical for having AI be able to do more, both today and in the multi-step, more agentic future. This is why we are thinking of the agent, this holy grail that everyone is building toward in coding. We are thinking of this as the combination of the human, the editor, and the AI. And this, it is always going to be able to do more than just the AI on its own, by definition. We want to put the AI in a place where it has all that context from your editor. It has all the code. It has all the intelligence that's in your editor. And we want it to be able to bring in the human in the loop when that can be helpful, because a little bit of input from the human is a valuable kind of context. And that's why the way that we are building our agent is to essentially have the human take the tasks that they want to do and have the AI take the tasks that it can do. Kind of like Gunjan's full self-driving car that he mentioned. You start out driving in the easiest highway driving rather than the hardest city driving. And that's how you can build an agent when it's in the editor. You can pick off the easiest, dumbest things that developers don't want to do. Whereas if you have an AI agent that is completely outside of the editor, it's pretty much got to get to 100%. It's got to do all the hard parts as well, or it's really frustrating to prompt and chat it back to 100%. So universal context, making developers' lives better already, making AI better already, and more autonomous coding, all of this stuff feeds into that. These are the 2 areas that we are really excited about. If you've got ideas, if you've got tasks that you want to be able to automate with AI, come find us. I mean, really, come find each other as well. Also, if you have any complaints, any feedback whatsoever about Cody or anything that we make at SourceGraph, we would love to hear it. We use our products all the time and want to make them better. So this is what we're exploring. And based on what we've heard from all the panels, based on what we've heard from all of you, really excited about the progress that this is going to bring and make it so that a lot more devs here are using Code AI all the time. So thank you all, and I'll pass it back to Madison.
All right, thank you. Yeah. Let's get just one more round of applause for everybody who spoke today. That was awesome. Great. Well, that concludes all the programming. We are, again, just so thrilled that all of you showed up. Incredible turnout. Hope you got something useful out of today. I hear there are drinks out on the patio, so back the way you came in, some food in the hallway, and go get your mingle on. Meet each other, talk about your hot takes, and seriously, share your feedback with the SourceGraph team. So thank you.